right. So thank you, Brad. And I am so blessed to be here. You know, I have had a chance to speak at this conference a number of times. And let's just see here. And in fact, many times. And I am an Oregonian. This group who works with Oregon, ORTIi, is one of the best group of coaches, leaders that I've met across the country. So I am really privileged to be here. And it is April 29th. Can you believe it's almost May Day? My childhood day on May Day was, we got up really early, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. We went out and picked flowers. We had flowers, we made little bouquets. And then my sister and I went door to door putting the May Day bouquets on people's steps. That was a beautiful day. So I'm going to be doing that on May 1st. When I was asked to present the conference theme, you should not have missed this because every session was on effective reading instructional practices. So that is exactly what we are here for. Each of us, every single person on this virtual conference is concerned about being certain that students are optimum readers and comprehenders, that we would do everything we can to give them that skill. As I was preparing, I looked down at a little sign that's on my desk, which is from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better. And this is the ever-evolving information on the science of reading, the science of instruction, that we keep adding to what we know, and we have to keep evolving and do better. And I can tell you, whether you're from Utah or Washington or Florida or Oregon, or I saw people from Hawaii and Alaska, you have done your best. And now you go to conferences like this so that you can gather new information that would be powerful in terms of student learning. So when you know better, you do better. Now, just a few weeks ago in April, I turned 75. And I think that makes you sort of reflect back over your career of 55 years, which I'm still totally involved in. And as I prepared for this, I had some thoughts that were not unlike the thoughts that were conveyed by Brad, that reading is a civil right. And remember yesterday, Marianne said, reading is a human right. And all of us strongly believe this. And what I have noticed in my time of 55 years is this constant feeling of urgency, that we have students for a limited amount of time, that we know that our instruction makes a difference and we need to optimize it. And it means that we have a need not just for a feeling of urgency, but for urgency into action, that we know something and then we do it. And we might have had some fluff in our instruction and we say, nope, I should have done this and put my energy there. We are going to look at what we might have in place in our schools in terms of reading instruction, so that we can be certain that we have the optimum instruction. And if there's something that we can do better, we're going to do better. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked this question. What should we do? What should we look at? What should we know is in our literacy program? And so a few years ago, I wrote up a checklist, which I'm going to share with you today, and one that you can take right to your school and say, do we do this? Do we do this? Do we do this? Do we do this? No, we don't do that. We need to add to it. With that, let's begin that journey. And first of all, we all know that our ultimate goal for students is that they would read accurately, fluently, but with very good comprehension. And so what do we know about this? So comprehension is the outcome that we want, but comprehension has many aspects to it. So if I sit with a student, maybe a third grader, maybe an eighth grader, and I hand them a passage and I want them to comprehend it, I know that one, they have to be able to read the words accurately and fluently. And I've long said that being able to read the words was necessary, though not sufficient, but necessary for comprehension. If you can't read the words, there is no comprehension hope. You all know this. But they also need to know the meaning of the words. And they also need to have some background knowledge, which I had just a wonderful group yesterday, just looking at the power of knowledge and the power of background knowledge on your comprehension. So I can read the words accurately and fluently. I know the meaning of words. I have adequate background knowledge, and I can direct my attention, my executive functioning on the critical content that I am reading. And all of these are necessary for the outcome of comprehension. So one of the things we can do is we can ask ourselves, what does our school need to do in order to ensure that students can read accurately and fluently? What do we need to do to optimize the students' vocabulary? What do we need to do to optimize their background knowledge? And what can we do to direct their attention to critical content? Well, we're going to start with the student needs to be able to read accurately and fluently. Now, you may not have these checklists right at your table right now, but they're online. In fact, the materials that I put in the Google folder for this presentation includes carefully selected articles that could be read in PLCs on comprehension, on research, overall, I put in a very good review of research that covers basically all areas we're going to cover. I also put in a document you must read, and that was one put out by the Reading League, which was, what is the science of reading? It's excellent. And so check those out, and the checklist will be in there also with the PowerPoint, so that you could use this however you wish. Feel free to edit it, use it. You're welcome. So we're going to focus on the first one. So why is this so critical? Well, read this to yourself. Put your thumb up when you're done. I know you're not in the audience, but you can be an active participant. Okay, so we do know that fluent, accurate word recognition is an absolute hallmark of skilled comprehension. And this one I'm going to read with you, so follow the cursor and read it with me. And that poor readers are most always limited by their inability to use letter sound skills, e.g. phonics skills, to identify unfamiliar words. So almost always, when you have students that are referred to intervention, referred to special ed for reading, that the students will have difficulty in terms of letter sound associations and the ability to figure out unfamiliar words. And without those skills, without letter sound skills, they're also going to have difficulty developing a sight recognition vocabulary. Now, here's where we often get mixed up in terms of this term because we've misused it for so long. We've often referred to sight words as high frequency words, words like was and the, that they would have instant recognition. But sight recognition actually means that it's all the words that you instantly recognize. Every word on this page, you instantly recognize. It's a sight word. Some are low frequency, some are high frequency, but you already have that in your memory bank, so you recognize it instantly. So we know the importance of fluent, accurate word recognition. So let's check out what we should do at our school. And one of the things that we have known for 50 years is the importance of teaching foundation skills to all students to mastery. And we can list out these skills. But over time, we've also had to take in new information and make changes in what we did. For example, so these are things we would print skills so that the students know the names of the letters, so that they know the graphics. They have phonemic awareness, and we know the two most important skills there are, one is being able to blend the sounds into a word, and number two is being able to hear a word and segment it into phonemes, the two most critical phonemic awareness skills, because blending of sounds directly relates to decoding of words, and segmenting sounds directly relates to spelling words. And the students know letter sound associations. And we know that that has to be taught with a very clear sequence from easy to more difficult to high frequency to lower frequency, with things that are similar like B and D separated. And we know that we need to systematically teach decoding. Now, here's where sometimes we have gotten off track. So one day I was visiting a classroom that was taught by a niece, wonderful girl, wonderful woman now. And there was a sign that said, when you don't know a word, number one, look at the pictures. Oh my goodness, I just about went crazy when I saw this. Not a good idea to tell students to guess based on the pictures. No, the only hint for decoding is the letters on the paper. Look at the letters, say the sounds, blend the sounds together. Ask yourself, is that a real word? So sometimes we have gotten off track and we have not taught the best things. And this is where, when we know better, we do better. And now we are very intentional, teach letter sound associations, to put those sounds into words and blend them. And then we have sight words. And I already told you one error we've made is connecting it to and using it as a label for high frequency words that we want students to instantly recognize. But we actually want them to recognize words that are high frequency, like to, and words that they might not see as often, but they've seen a number of times, and now it's in their memory bank, like mastery. Now, let me just tell you another area. Right now, I am working on revision of a program that's been revised 5 times, which is phonics for reading. And one of the things that we did is we taught students how to read high frequency irregular words like was. And what most of us did is we said to ourselves, well, it's irregular. It is not pronounced was, but pronounced was. What we should do is teach it as the whole word. But then we have had some studies that said, no, those words still have the W and the S. The students still could utilize these sounds, even if it is an irregular word, not teaching it as a whole word, but teaching it as with the sounds that are within it. So I went through the research on irregular words. What a fun week or two I spent on that, and came to this conclusion that when we have high frequency words, that number one, we can teach students that when you know one word, you know words that end the same. If you know could, you know would. And so that takes care of many high frequency irregular words. Number two, if you sound out the word and you go, if you have M-A-N-Y and you go, manny, manny, and you say, that doesn't make sense in this sentence. The word is many. So that you could use the sounds you know and then ask yourself, does it make sense? Another way to tackle irregular words. And number three, you could use the spelling of the word. So notice my evolution and your evolution and the science of reading's evolution so that we're now using those three with different kinds of words. The words dictate, are we going to do, if you know another word that rhymes with it, use that knowledge, sound it out and make it a real word and look intently at the spelling and spell it. See the evolution. And then we want within these foundation skills to be taught that the students would also gain fluency, automaticity, and fluency contains, can they read accurately? Can they read with appropriate pace? And do they have expression? So you should have in your school a really good program that teaches foundation skills. And it should be taught in kindergarten, first and second grade, and then more advanced decoding in the upper grades. And I put a little extra energy into this one to remind you how important this is, because if we have a very good foundation skills program, then when students go into third or fourth grade, they're able to read with ease, they're able to read with appropriate pace, and they can read for entertainment as well as for knowledge. But we really need to have this in place. If you want to reduce referrals to intervention and special ed, be certain this one is in place at your school site. Well, and we have to teach in the upper grades in third, fourth, and fifth grade, starting early on, but really intentionally there, how to read multisyllabic words. And we need to have interventions at our school site in regard to this goal, they read accurately and fluently, so that we have interventions that would teach the skills to the students that have not acquired them in K1 and 2. My afternoon session is directly on that subject. But also it's useful to introduce unfamiliar words and guide the students in the pronunciation of those words. So these are the things I'd love you to check off in terms of, does your school have each of these parts in place in order for the students to be able to read accurately and fluently? So let's just look at the last one. Now, in preparing here, I had so many possible examples, but I decided to utilize narrative passages. Sometimes I would use only informational passages, but today it is narrative. Maybe it's because I'm trying to have that poetic nature of the keynote or yesterday. So this was the passage that I was teaching in a classroom that was second and third graders. And it's a lovely narrative story. And well, you might ask, well, what are these numbers? I broke it down into parts where we're going to read a segment and then I'm going to ask questions at this point, read a segment and ask questions. So it's broken up into segments for comprehension. Later you can read the story. It's a good one. Okay, but as I looked at it, I said to myself, there are some words that I want to work on just the pronunciation. And most of them were multisyllabic words, and some of them were words in past tense. So this is actually from the day I taught it. So be my students and read the Title to yourself, put your thumb up when you know it. Pretend. And read it with me. Little Bear Lost. So we're going to read these words by parts. And everyone, what part? X, what part? Plain, good. And the word is explain. Yes, when I tell you how to do something, what, everyone? I explain. Now, yesterday, if I explained something to you, I explained it. Say the word, explained. So we went through the pronunciation of the words. Now, if I did that for this passage, would the students be able to read it with more flow, more fluidity? Absolutely. There's a number of things we do, and too many materials don't, they just assume that the students will be able to pronounce all of the words, and they need to take a moment to go over the pronunciation. Well, the next thing is the students have to be able to understand the meanings of the words. Wow, of course they need to understand the meanings. They can pronounce the words and they need to understand the meanings. So I stood back and reflected, what would I want you to do in terms of vocabulary? Because I'm going to read when I stop, you say the next word. Notice I'm infusing a little active participation here because we would never teach where our students didn't have to participate. So I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. Indeed, one of the most enduring findings in reading research is the extent to which students' vocabulary knowledge relates to their reading comprehension. Absolutely. The higher my vocabulary knowledge, higher my comprehension will be of that passage. So what should we do at our site? Now, immediately comes to mind, well, we should teach some vocabulary before they read a passage. Yes, but let me tell you, language is, writing is written language, and reading is taking that print and matching it to our oral language. So we've got to make our schools rich, 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 rich in terms of oral language. So what does that mean we do? Well, one, we use high quality language as teachers. You see, we, all of us, have had the benefit of not just 12 years of education, but some 16 years, some 18 years, some 20 years. I mean, we've had education, and we have been around people who've had education. And as a result, we have very high vocabulary. And we need to share that with students. And what would that mean? Well, I took a moment more than a moment. So one of the things that occurred during the pandemic is I trained across many different states, literacy teams and principals on how to observe teachers teaching and give actionable feedback to them. And so I actually have now watched more than 220 teachers being taught in Ohio, in Michigan, in Oregon, in Hawaii, in Alaska. But one of the things I just took a note of is when teachers use higher level vocabulary and then just embedded in it through what we call fast mapping, where you give just a little explanation of a lot of words. So I went back and retrieved ones that I had seen. So one day I'm watching a kindergarten teacher who's going to teach a lesson, and the students are going to be on the rug. And the teacher stood in front of the room and said, we're going to assemble, we are going to gather on the rug. So the teacher said to herself, I'm going to use high classroom language and just pair in the meaning of that word. This can become a habit. So another one, it was just recently that I watched this video, and the teacher said, now, you as fifth graders, we've had many accomplishments, and you as individuals had many accomplishments during this school year. But we could even increase your accomplishments, things that you're successful at. The pairing in, the fast mapping of a definition. So let us share the gift of our language with students, but let us get the habit of adding an explanation, a quick one, adding a synonym, a quick one, fast mapping to support them. And of course, we're going to use academic language. So we're not going to, when we teach a math lesson, talk about the top and the bottom number. We're going to talk about the numerator and the denominator. So we can lift up our language at our school site. And then one of the best ways to improve vocabulary in the primary grades, in kindergarten, first, second, and third, as well as in preschool, would be to read narrative, but most importantly, informative read alouds in those grades. Every teacher in primary grades reads to students, so we need to pick out books to intentionally improve these students' vocabulary. So how's that going at your school? We should encourage wide independent reading. The more you read, the more vocabulary you gain. But we also know that the time in school is so precious with experts, you are the expert, to teach students, that we really need to encourage the independent reading to be done outside of the school so that we can optimize our teaching, our modeling, our guided practice, our checking for understanding within the school site. And we do need to teach kids how to figure out unknown words. Now, there's lots of strategies that we could teach, but all of them would have the students use the context clues plus the morphemes within the word, the meaningful parts in the word. You know, my favorite strategy, because it's so easy to remember, is inside, outside. I'm reading along, I find a word I don't know, and I say to myself, how can I figure this word out? Well, first I'm going to look inside the word. Is there a prefix or a suffix that might help me, or a base word that would be of assistance? And then I'm going to look outside, first in the sentence where the word is. And if I don't get any hints, then I'm going to read more sentences, see if I get hints, and I'm going to ask myself, what does the word mean? And I'm going to try it in the context. Inside, outside, inside, outside. Well, so what else can we do for vocabulary? Remember, this is sort of like looking at your school and checking yourself out. We could also explicitly teach critical vocabulary words. Yes, we could. We could pick out a small number of words that we're going to teach, and we're going to come back and review, and we're going to utilize so that they become a part of your repertoire. Because guess what? Direct vocabulary instruction has an impressive track record in improving students' background knowledge and comprehension of academic content. You know, there is sort of a consistent message when we look at the science of instruction. Teaching helps. Explicit instruction helps. It makes a big difference. And basically, when I develop your vocabulary, I'm also developing your comprehension. So we know that it makes a difference to teach vocabulary. And when we look at the research on teaching vocabulary, we can check these off. Did we select the words deliberately? Are they useful in the moment? Are they useful in the future? Are they necessary for this passage? Did we carefully explain the word meanings? And did we follow up where the students had to think and use the vocabulary terms? Well, if you read Explicit Instruction, the book that I wrote with Charles Hughes at Penn State, won chapters on vocabulary, and we teach a strategy basically pulled from many studies on vocabulary to have a strategy that I could use if I taught vocabulary before a reading lesson, passage, if I taught vocabulary within math, if I taught vocabulary in science. So we'll just review this for you. And I'm certain it's very consistent with the routine that you use. And there is such power in instructional routines. If I have a routine, then I, as a teacher, can reduce my own cognitive load. So I can put more attention on students because I know this is what I'm going to do next. This is what I'll do next. This is what I do next. This is what I do next. Powerful. So we introduced the pronunciation of the word. Now, this is much more critical than we have given it power in the past. Why? In a study that was led by Anita Archer, one of my favorite researchers, and I put a few articles in the chat or in the Google file by Anita Archer. But they found that if students, and theirs was a secondary study, if students couldn't pronounce the word, they couldn't apply meaning to it and to store it and subsequently retrieve it. So we need to be certain they know the pronunciation, particularly if it's a word they've never heard or said. And then we're going to introduce the meaning of the word in student-friendly terms. And we're going to illustrate it with some examples, maybe even just oppose it to a non-example. And then we're going to ask questions to check their understanding. So this is something that we can do in all of our subject areas. And on a daily basis, we can teach vocabulary. So we're going to be working on the language, high quality language, academic language, and we're going to teach students how to figure out the meaning of words independently. And we're going to teach a small number of words to mastery. Now, so I looked at that passage and I asked myself, are there any words that are seminal to the understanding of the story? And one word popped out, which was the word pester. Now, actually, pester, we could learn quite rapidly, but I used it to introduce this. So you're going to teach with me. So wherever you are, talk out loud and teach it with me and go. This word is pester. What word? Students would say pester. Continue. Tap and say the parts of the word. Pester. Again, pester. Pester is a verb and action word. Now, basically here I added an intervention we found very useful for working on pronunciation, and that is oral segmentation. Pester. But maybe I'm teaching this word, pronunciation. So I can really guarantee that the students understand the pronunciation. And then we give a meaning, and again, teach it with me. Go. When you ask for something again and again and again, you pester the other person. So if you ask for something again and again and again, you what? Pester. And here are some synonyms. And do synonyms mean same or different? Same or similar. You annoy them, you nag, you bother. Actually, I think all students would know what pester is, though they might not know the word. And then I'm going to illustrate it with some examples. And one type of example I could utilize a visual picture. Jay wants a piece of candy. He will pester his sister till he gets what he wants. He's going to be annoying as he pester. He's going to ask again and again. And Felicia wants a new game. She begs, she nags, she pesters her mother in hopes of getting the game. And then we ask questions. Now, so if you read the books by Isabel Beck and Margaret McCowan, excellent vocabulary researchers, they talk about asking deep processing questions. For example, why might a child pester a parent? I give them a sentence starter. A child might pester a parent because. Now, here's something that, you know, I look back over my career and really 55 years of training teachers and teaching myself. I see some things that I said, oh, I wish I had done that 50 years ago. Oh, I wish I had done that when I was teaching at University of Oregon. We had somebody from San Diego when I taught at San Diego State. And that was to stress the use of sentence stems. See, if I asked the question, why might a child pester a parent, and gave them a time to think and then called on a student, and a student might say, well, so that they would get something, right? I could call on another student because they really wanted something from that parent, or they wanted the attention of the parent. Now, those are all good answers, except not one of those children used the word pester. So one of the really big benefits of giving students sentence stems is that they are going to use the language that we are teaching, the vocabulary that we are teaching. You can give an oral sentence stem, a written sentence stem, but remember to add that to your repertoire. Remember, when you know better, you do better. Now I always do it. And we could check understanding with examples and non-examples. At a grocery store, Matt begs and begs and begs for a donut. Is that pester or not pester? At the grocery store, Matt asks once for a donut. Not pester. And this is one that I have been adding to my repertoire, and that is after looking at Marzano's research on what makes a difference and noticing that at the very top of that list from their research team was doing compare and contrast. Again and again, if you want higher order thinking, compare and contrast, compare and contrast, compare and contrast. Well, infuse that into vocabulary. Last week, we learned the word request, which the students had. Ones, think how request and pester are similar. Twos, think how request and pester are different. Wow, you're going to really have to think about this. So the students had time to think about it. They shared with their partner, and then I called on a number of students. But the big idea here is compare and contrast. Every subject area, if you want higher order thinking, compare and contrast. Well, and then I introduced the other words, pester, pestered, pestering, pest, that are in that vocabulary word family. So when a principal recently asked me, Anita, what is one thing that I should do next year? Because I need a limited focus. Well, I actually told the principal two things. I said, number one, work on active participation. Everybody does everything. That's from the science of instruction. Number two, work on vocabulary in all, it's a middle school principal, all of your classes, because that will improve comprehension. Well, okay, there's a review of that strategy: pronunciation, meaning, examples, understanding. So we've looked at 2 of these, and I did a whole session on the third one, has adequate background knowledge. So what should your school do in terms of background knowledge, which we are coming back into a consciousness that, wow, we should have been attending more to knowledge, that we have not been as good about ensuring that students have bodies of knowledge. I mean, I would like us to stuff children filled with vocabulary and background knowledge. And so what should we do? Well, they need general world knowledge. They need to know things like trees could be deciduous. They need things like those group of countries are on the continent of Europe. And they need specific domain knowledge that relates to the passage they're going to read. And they need lots of knowledge in many domains. Pretty amazing. Well, pick up something today and read it and stop yourself and say, what did I know already about that? What did I know already about that? And you're going to be amazed about the amount of knowledge that you have in permanent memory. It's quite a good thing to do. And so here's what we know. Okay, I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. Background knowledge of text has a major impact on whether or not a reader can comprehend. Absolutely. And that's across grades and reading ability. Yes, your background knowledge makes a difference. So what should our schools do? Well, when I look at the research and I say, if we did this and this and this and this, the students would have more background knowledge to support comprehension. We could read in the primary grades, which we already had for vocabulary, books, particularly informative, informational read alouds. So in the webinar that I did yesterday on background knowledge, I used an example of a second grade where we are picking books on the same topic. In that case, it was on birds. And the books that were on birds, one was a narrative, but the rest were informational texts. And they talked about the general characteristics of birds. But then we also picked out birds books because it was for a class, second grade classroom right here in Portland, Oregon. We picked out ducks. Okay. If you don't get that joke, you're not an Oregonian, because we do love our Oregon ducks. And eagles, because we have them. And this school also picked out swifts because the swifts are a migratory bird that comes right to my area. But we read what was many books on one topic to get a knowledge network. And what else can we do? So this one is, to me, since we're doing read alouds anyway, let's see if we can use it to intentionally, good instruction's always intentional, to build up background knowledge. And of course, we should be teaching science, where we would get vocabulary and background knowledge, social studies, health, and other classes that would contain knowledge that will be useful in the moment and in the future. Again, really encouraging outside of class reading, maybe with book clubs where the kids come in and they share their books, or putting up reviews for students to read from their peers about what books they've read, having books available to take home and read, really, because when you're reading, it will have a positive impact on vocabulary, and it will have a positive impact on embedded knowledge. And then, of course, we can be very intentional. And read the last one with me. Directly teach critical background knowledge before passage reading. So if we're going to read a passage, and I know that if you have already some knowledge and permanent memory, that you're going to be able to connect what we're reading to that, and that's going to improve your comprehension. The more background knowledge you have before reading a passage, the better your comprehension will be. Now, I always utilize this Oregonian example. So if you came to my city, which is Portland, Oregon, and said to me, well, what should I do in Portland, Oregon? It's a beautiful city, so much to do, but I would always say, well, put on your list of to-dos, number one, go to Pal's bookstore. And Pal's bookstore is the largest, I think still the largest independent bookstore in the United States. Whoa. In fact, it's so big for you non-Oregonians. When you get there, you get a map that shows you rooms in this big, huge bookstore. And I always go to the Rose Room. Now, the Rose Room is children's literature and many other things of interest to me, psychology, so I always end up there and usually end up at one of those little tiny desks looking at children's books. And basically any book I picked up in the Rose Room, I would have background knowledge for an excellent comprehension. But I always envision that in the basement, way down in the basement, there is a room that has a sign that says engineering. Now, if I went to that pretend room and picked out a book, I could probably read the words and maybe even know the meaning of some of them, but I would not be able to create comprehension because I simply have no background knowledge. That's how powerful background knowledge is in our adult lives and in our students' lives. So we've got to create some. So when I went to prepare for reading this story, yes, I taught them how to read some of the words so that they could read more fluently and put their attention on the understanding. I introduced Pester because that was actually highly related to the story. And if you didn't understand Pester, you'd miss out on one of the threads of the plot. And they needed some background knowledge because I thought it was very possible that they were not familiar with the Lakota Native American tribe, that they may not be knowledgeable about the location of North Dakota or South Dakota. Probably your students wouldn't know that necessarily. And there was some other knowledge that they needed that would make a difference. So this is the lesson that I taught. And I want to check our time. Perfect. So I taught some background knowledge. I'm just going to show you it, but you'll understand the thinking that went with it. So we're going to read a story called Little Bear Lost, and it is a fiction. It is a short story. And here are the characters. You know that there are some studies, even in middle school and high school, if the students are reading a narrative, that giving them an idea of the characters beforehand significantly supported their processing in terms of comprehension. So you make out with Macbeth, you make out a map of the characters and introduce it beforehand and show the relationships on the map so that I have one. So I'll put that in the chat box so that the students already have some prior knowledge that they can tap into. Okay, back to Little Bear Lost. So our characters are first the Lakota, a Native American tribe. So the Lakota in this story we're going to learn about some of their traditions, some of their ways of life. Now, Blue Cloud is a young girl. They don't tell us the age, but you probably think that she is probably 11, 12, right in that area. And it is about her and her friends, but also about her little brother. Little Bear isn't a bear that got lost. Little Bear is Blue Cloud's brother. And the title does tell us something that happens to him. He gets lost. And the setting is in the 1800s, so not recent, and either in the state of North Dakota or South Dakota. We know it's in the Dakotas, but they don't tell us what state. But let's just have an idea of where that was. So here we have North Dakota, South Dakota, but let's look at it from where your vision is. So North Dakota, South Dakota. Now I noticed that we had one person from Florida. So probably your students wouldn't know North and South Dakota. We had some people from Yakima, Washington. I know that city very well, and their students might not know it. So we fill in that background knowledge. And we might, as we're doing it, teach vocabulary, because vocabulary is a type of background knowledge. So I taught prairie and checked out, is it a prairie or not? And then introduced the Lakota tribe and the fact that they were nomadic, that they moved from place to place, which was critical to the content understanding. And then introduced that they moved close to buffalo, and they hunted the buffalo and for food and for skin, and that they had horses that allowed them to move from place to place with more ease. And we introduced the teepees, which were portable. They could take them down and move as they followed the bison or buffalo. And that there was really important what was a cradle board where a baby was carried, because that was critical to the plot. Now, I introduced that information and they read it with me and they were actively involved. But here's something important that we know about knowledge. If I want that knowledge to go to permanent memory, it is not just me giving it to them, but it is getting it out through what is called retrieval practice, where the students have to retrieve it. So after I had done this, I said, what are some things that you've learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s? And I had them stand up and face their partner. And I said, twos, you're going to go first. You're going to say, after they rehearsed it to themselves, you're going to say, here are some things I learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s. And then they had to say it. And then I said, ones, now it's your turn. Here's some things I learned about the Lakota tribe in the 1800s. But you see, this is going to make a difference in terms of comprehension, because as I'm reading that story, and I come to the fact that the baby is on a cradle board, I know what a cradle board is, and that the mother often carries it on her back, but also it could be carried on the horse. Maybe this is what's going to allow Blue Cloud to ride the horse with the baby and actually carry the baby, which she's pestered her mother for again and again. So I am introducing it, and that probably took me about 5 minutes, not more than that. But it involved introducing with clarity the information, having them to rehearse it, and then having them retrieve it. Well, so we have covered 3 of these checklists to ask yourself, what is my school doing? Great to sit down at one of your PLCs and look at this to see if there's any areas. But there is a final one, and that is I need to put my attention on, my intention too, on the content, so that I will have better comprehension. I bet you have someday read something where your thoughts were somewhere else. And then the next day you picked up that book and you have no recall of what you read because you didn't have full attention on it. So what are we supposed to do? Well, again, let me just check our time.
Anita?
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask about the time because it's about time that we need to wrap it up anyways.
Well, we do because
we're gonna.
So can I just, I'm going to do this. First of all, this is for you to read because you've got it available to you. And as I end this, I can't leave you without saying this. Okay, see, that's all for you. This is what happens to me. But the golden principles or Archerisms, they still guide me. Teach the stuff and cut the fluff. How well you teach equals how well they learn. I do it, we do it, you do it. I coined that in 1974. Demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. Learning is not a spectator sport. Everyone does everything. And feedback feeds forward. But you remembered some of the ones I had in terms of management. Avoid the void or they will fill it. If you expect it, pre-correct it. So you're moving on to your next one. You know, I just got so involved in being certain that you had these checklists, but you use them now because we have a need to be certain that we teach with passion and manage with compassion. So do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better. And there's all kinds of examples over my evolution and your evolution of knowing better and doing better.